Welcome back, friend. Tonight we walk in Rome, 34 BC, where the Ides of March have fallen like a blade and a small book in Julius Caesar's own hand has slipped out of sight. If that book is bent to serve a lie, Antony's funeral oration will fix a false memory and set Rome on a darker road. I am Snorelock Holmes, your calm companion through dangerous histories so you can rest. Before we begin, tell me in the comments which city you're listening from tonight. Breathe and listen. I will carry the weight and the watch for you. Chapter 1. Kettle, ink, and a knock. The rain was a thin veil at my window, a shiver of silver threads that never quite formed a storm. I stood at my desk with a small kettle, whispering on the burner, and a bottle of oil for an old fountain pen. Work like that has a rhythm to it. A few drops on the feed, a soft cloth, a twist of the nib between my fingers until the steel shone and the stain of old ink gave up its ghosts. I labelled a neat stack of museum note cards in my own hand. The letters curled at the ends, a habit I've never quite trained myself out of. Penelope, my old eagle, snored on the rug, a sound like a tiny bellows. Every few breaths he knows twitched at memories only dogs can smell in their sleep. I smiled and turned one more card. Vesta. Inventory anomalies. Red thread. The tea kettle murmured as if to agree. Then came the knock. Soft at first, a polite question. Then a second, heavier, more of a plea. I set the pen down and crossed the room. The door opened to a young man with ink on his fingers and panic in his eyes. He swayed once and caught himself against the frame. Lucius Attilius Naso, I asked, because names help frightened people remember themselves. He nodded hard. His lips were pale. Sir Snorelock Holmes, do you take cases in the night? I do my best work when the world is quiet, I said. Inside. He stumbled in. I eased him into my chair and pushed a glass of water into his hand. His breath came in fast, whisperer pulls. He held out a small object, pinched between two fingers, as if it might bite, a broken disc of beeswax, impressed with a torch, emblem of Vesta. A second stamp, smaller, sat along one edge like a hurried signature, and on the wax were 3 black dots of soot, set like a tiny triangle. From the Temple of Vesta, he gasped. From a chest that should have held linens for rites, but there was a codex. Palm-sized, thin boards, red thread, Caesar's hand. Now it's gone. The kettle sighed behind me. Penelope lifted their head, blinked, and went back to dreaming. The room itself seemed to narrow down to that warm, ash-scented seal in the young man's shaking fingers. Tell me, I said, from the beginning. He tried to speak, then shuddered. He's watching, he whispered. The one with the lamp. The Lamplighter, I said. The words settled in the room. Drink. You're safe here. He swallowed water and stared at the Vesta seal as if it could still make decisions. I found a book, he said. I think Rome could burn if the wrong man reads it. Then we will keep it from the wrong man, I said, and put it where it can do the least harm and the most good. I set the broken seal on a blotter. You brought the right trouble to the right door. Chapter 2, in which a broken seal speaks. He steadied. I took the broken seal into my hand. Beeswax is a record keeper. It remembers heat, hands, and haste. This bit was flecked with fine ash that had worked down into the wax itself. In the Temple of Vesta, The sacred fire never sleeps. Even the seals carry a fingerprint of smoke. On the face was the goddess's torch, clean lines, well cut. Along one edge a smaller mark, almost hidden, like a shorthand flourish. And on the back, 3 pinpricks of soot in a tidy triangle, as if a 3-footed lamp had kissed it. Lucius set a scrap of parchment beside it. On the strip, in faded cinnabar, a red mineral pigment I could smell if I leaned close, was a thin line, the tail end of a rubric, a heading. The edge was torn, not cut. It had been removed in a hurry. "Tell me about the codex," I said. "It was the night after the Ides," he said. "The city hummed like a hive without a queen. I was in the temple, alone with the inventory. The chief Vestal had ordered a review. Things moved in and out the day of the assassination, and she wanted order back. I opened a garment chest, expecting veils and towels. Instead, near the bottom, 2 thin wooden boards, drilled for a red linen thread, palm-sized. A codex, not the heavy rolls we keep for long readings, something for a hand that writes on the move. The thread was dyed with madder. The boards were brushed with a wash of glue that smelled faintly of fish oil. And inside, pages with a neat, compressed hand, Caesar's own shorthand. I know it. I've indexed letters he sent the Vestals years ago. What did you read? I swear I didn't eat to pry. I meant to list and report, but the first page I turned held names. Marcus Junius Brutus, Gaius Cassius Longinus, Decimus Junius Brutus Albinus. Each name had a symbol beside it. It looked like a hooked mark I've seen only in a few drafts of his, like a little arm reaching back. I remembered a scribe telling me it meant already accounted for, settled in advance. He swallowed. Beneath the names was a note about an intermediary due for a meeting after the Ides. March 16th, the day after Caesar died. I said, "Who was the intermediary?" The page I saw didn't say. Just the one who believes himself unseen. And then a rubbed line, like it was smudged. He looked sick. Before I could close the chest, a man came in with the chief Vestal's written authority to inspect chests for funerary needs. He was quiet. His cloak smelled of lamp oil. On his finger, a ring with a dolphin. And he carried a brass lamp with 3 feet like little claws. "The Lamplighter," I said softly. "Quintus Marius Nerva." The name felt cool in the mouth. Men like Nerva live in corners and carry their own light. He glanced at my list, Lucius said. He told me, very gently, that the city was a dangerous place for loose pages. He implied the chief Vestal had requested his help. He offered me a purse. I refused. He smiled like a teacher pleased by a child's recitation. He left. But when I went to fetch the chief Vestal, footsteps followed me in the street. 2 days of it. I doubled back. I hid. When I returned to the temple, the chest was sealed. This seal. He tapped the broken wax. But inside, the codex was gone. Only a scrap of rubric. I broke the seal and ran here. I don't know who else to trust. I set the seal and parchment aside and drew the blotter closer. "Let me be plain," I said. On the Ides of March, Caesar walked into the Curia of Pompeii. He had power no Roman liked to name, dictator perpetuo, dictator for life. Many felt he was a king, even if he didn't wear the title. 1 month before, at Lupercalia, Mark Antony held a diadem crown on the rostra and offered it. Caesar pushed it aside, once, then twice, but the taste of kingship was in the air, and it soured men. Lucius nodded, eyes fixed on my mouth as if words were anchors. I went on. A conspiracy formed. Brutus, Cassius, Decimus, and others chose the Curia of Pompeii for their work. Outside, Spirina, an Etruscan soothsayer, had warned Caesar to beware the Ides. Calpurnia, Caesar's wife, dreamed of his death. He almost stayed home. Decimus, a man Caesar trusted, talked him into attending. Inside the Curia, Lucius Tullius Cimber asked for his brother's recall from exile. Caesar refused. Cimber dragged Caesar's toga from his shoulders, signal. Casca struck the first blow. Others followed. They stabbed him 23 times. A doctor later said only one wound to the chest was surely fatal. He fell near the statue of Pompey, the old rival. I let the picture rest a moment. Even in calm rooms, that scene has a weight, like stone on the chest. Afterward, I said, the conspirators expected cheers. They got locked doors. Antony survived and began to maneuver. He kept Caesar's appointments intact. He held the will. Soon, Octavian, Caesar's heir, would arrive. But the turn that matters for us is the funeral. Antony means to speak over Caesar's body. He will show the blood-stained toga. He will read the will which gives money to every Roman. If Antony binds the city to Caesar's memory with words and theatre, the first story may become the only story for a long time. Lucius closed his eyes. If the codex appears, someone can say Caesar knew about the conspiracy, or planned to forgive it, or planned to crush it, whatever serves them. Exactly, I said. If the Lamplighter has the book, he can add a line, shave a word, turn a mark. He will not toss truth away. He will pin it to a card and write a new label. I picked up the wax seal and lifted it to my nose. Beeswax, ash, a faint sweetness of poppy, lamp oil. Those 3 soot dots were not a mistake. They were the resting mark of a 3-footed lamp set down to hold the seal while it cooled. I touched the cinnabar scrap. Cinnabar's smell is mineral, a little like iron in the rain. Mixed with fish oil, it becomes a smooth paste used to prime a lamp's wick to prevent flicker. My fingers came back with a fine red dust. I brushed it into my palm. And this shorthand mark? Lucius asked, voice steadier now. I drew a little hook on my blotter with my pen. Caesar sometimes used this when a person or payment was already settled, already accounted for. It's a quiet phrase for a loud idea. To mark Brutus, Cassius, and Decimus with it means they were entered in a ledger of a kind before the deed. The codex recorded not just names, but a plan to meet someone who thought himself invisible on March 16th. If that is true, the day after Caesar's death still had work in it. Either Caesar intended to turn parts of the conspiracy inside out, or someone intended to turn his memory into a key for another lock. Lucius leaned forward. Then we have to find it before Antony speaks. We do not need to hold it forever, I said. We need to keep it from being used as a sword while the city's blood is still hot. I looked at Penelope. She had rolled onto her back, paws curled like commas. You did well to bring me the seal. He gave a short, breathy laugh. I brought you a broken circle and a torn edge. Memory is made of fragments, I said. Enough of them form a map. I set the pieces in a line. Wax, scrap, soot. Now we follow the line. Chapter 3. Ash remembers fire. I dimmed the lamp and drew the curtains. The rain was still there, a steady whisper against the glass. I sat in my chair and held the broken Vesta seal in my hand. Beeswax softens with warmth, and memory softens too. I breathed across the surface until the ash flecks seemed to darken. Ash remembers fire, I murmured. Let memory flow back to its flame. I traced the 3 soot pricks with my forefinger. The triangle fit neatly under my fingertip like a small star map. Penelope snored. Somewhere a pipe ticked as it cooled. The kettle gave a last sigh and went still. Then the room shifted the way it always does when I slip from waking to the work. Tea steam thinned into the smell of olive wood smoke. The arms of my chair curved outward, and when my hands settled, they rested on the cold smoothness of a curule seat, the kind Roman magistrates used. The floor under my shoes became stone, damp, and faintly gritted with sand. I opened my eyes. Dawn blue held the sky in Rome. I stood under the long shadow of the theatre of Pompeii. The porticoes were cool and wet from a night shower. Swallows stitched the air with soft chirps. To my right, the curia's doors were shut, heavy wood black against the pale light. Ahead, a bronze statue of Pompey the Great looked out with that fixed Roman calm, as if yesterday and today were all the same to him. The city was waking. Somewhere close, a vendor swept sand across a threshold with a quick, practiced whisper. From a temple nearby rose the metallic tang of early sacrifices, iron and incense sharing the air. In the arcade, a lamp guttered on a sill and left 3 small kisses of soot like tiny footprints. Rome breathed. I breathed with it, and I began. Chapter 4. Ash and Footprints. Rome met me with damp stone and early breath. The theatre of Pompeii curved like a shell against the morning, its arcades cupping the sound of vendors sweeping sand across thresholds. Swallows stitched the low sky. At my back, the Curia of Pompeii kept its doors shut, the bronze hinges dark with last night's rain. This was the place where Gaius Julius Caesar had fallen under senators' knives. The air still held a cold echo of it, as if the marble remembered. I moved slowly under the porticoes. My shoes made a patient rhythm on the stone. A purge of water trickled from a drain and vanished into a crack. I watched the workers more than the walls. Rome tells you what is happening by the hands that move at first light. There were men in plain wool cloaks, checking tablets and asking neat questions, the kind of questions you ask when you want to count a city without letting the city know it has been counted. They were not magistrates and not market men. They kept their hoods low and they carried brass lamps in broad daylight. One of them set his lamp on a sill to tie a thong at his wrist. It had a 3-footed stand. When he picked it up, it left 3 tiny soot marks in a triangle. That was the Lamplighter's trade sign, the quiet triangular memory of a tool that never claimed to leave any. The metallic tang of sacrifice drifted from a shrine nearby. Someone had opened a small jar of salt. A food seller's boy stacked figs like little hearts and did not look up. The theatre's columns were warm burnished by the polishing of hands over years, and those same hands now tightened on broom handles as the quiet men passed. I let the scouts map the arcades while I traced a different line a stolen book would follow if the book had entered this place and then left it again. Behind the curia, past a storeroom with a warped lintel, a plank door had splintered near the latch. My fingertips found a rough thread caught in that splinter. I pinched it free and rolled it on my thumb. Dyed linen. Red, the colour that Lucius Atilius Naso had named as the binding thread. It had a faint, oily feel, not simple dye. The tang on it was particular, cinnabar and fish oil toot. Cinnabar is a red pigment. It is the old world's mercury ore ground fine into powder. Scribes use it sparingly to make rubricated titles and marks in the margins that say, "This line matters more than the other lines." Fish oil soot is a lamp worker's trick. When you mix the residue of fish oil flame with binder, you get a protective smear that keeps a travel lamp from flickering when wind snakes through a colonnade. My nose had learned that smell years ago on another case. Lampcraft has a signature. I crouched. Under the shelf inside, sheltered from the last wash of rain, a smear had caught in a small valley of dust. The color was rusty red, softened by brown grease. I touched it with the edge of my fingernail and lifted a grain to my tongue, just to taste the air around it, not for flavor. It was briny, almost like dried kelp. Not pleasant, but informative. Fish oil soot, primed for travel, pressed against a red mark. Whoever set a lamp here had handled rubricated pages. Whoever set it down expected to return, or expected to be unobserved. I stood, a scribe with ink-stained fingers, moving quicker than he wanted to, passed with a bundle of reeds and kept his eyes on the ground. I let him go. Panic is a poor tool for a detective. I watched the light. A shaft of sun eased in between two columns and landed on a low sill where another brass lamp had rested earlier. The 3-foot pattern repeated. That triangular soot sign was a ghostly footprint. If you know the pattern, you can see where a man has set the same tool down again and again, moving like a shadow on an event he is trying to frame. I followed the triangles along the portico. At each pause, I took stock. The quiet men. Lamplighter's scouts worked the open edges, asking for the names of scribes who had seen the Temple of Vesta's servants in these arcades after the Ides of March. They didn't threaten. They traded small coins for small answers and left the heavier persuasion for later. That patience is more dangerous than a knife in daylight. Knives shout, coins whisper. I paused at a pillar marked by old votive scratches. A minor actor, jest made into marble by time, had carved a line here years ago about the stage and truth. Rome forgets names and remembers stone. The city's memory was the central stake tonight. Mark Antony would give his funeral speech soon and set the tone of the city's grief. A single book in Caesar's hand could pull the audience one step to the left or the right and make the next century different. An older woman, head wrapped against the drizzle, leaned on her broom half a breath too long when she saw me watching the scouts. "You're not one of theirs," she said, without moving her mouth much. "No," I said softly. "I only notice soot." "Then you are seeing much of them," she murmured, and brushed at the triangle on the sill with her broom as though erasing a chalk game. The marks blurred and smudged. The men, a dozen paces away, did not even glance. They were used to their own vanishing tricks. I thanked her with a nod and moved on. At the bend leading toward a narrow service corridor, the triangles jumped from a waist-high sill to a very low ledge. That meant the lamp had been set down by someone crouching. I followed the line. The air cooled. Here, the scent of olive wood smoke mingled with damp stone. I felt the space narrowing and breathed more slowly on purpose. I placed my hand to the wall, feeling for warmth where none should be. The stone there was a shade warmer, not with sun but with recent human contact. The corridor turned into a blind alcove. A patch of floor was cleaner than the rest, as if something had recently been dragged from it or put in it. The sealing wax stain at the corner told the story. A chest had rested here, small, garment-sized. Vesta's chests were moved for funerary preparations after the Ides. Under that shelf, the briny smear. In the splinter, the red thread. I could now see the path that the codex must have taken when it passed from one kind of sanctity to another. I listened. Somewhere across the courtyard, a boy laughed once and stopped when a man hissed. My ear drew back to the near sounds. Scuff of sandals, the tiny chuff a lamp makes when its wick drinks more oil. I let the shape of it settle into me. Calm makes room speak. A shadow paused at the mouth of the corridor. A scout leaned in, holding his lamp low. He tracked the alcove with the patience of a man who expects to find nothing and is pleased when he finds the footprint of nothing. He did not see me because I had pressed myself where the light fell weakly. His lamp's 3 little feet made their mark and moved away. When he was gone, I stepped out again. I pocketed the red thread and the small grain of cinnabar soot in a folded scrap. I would need them later as proof and compass. Proof is what you show the enemy. Compass is what you show yourself. I allowed myself one brief thought of Lucius Attilius Naso, the inventory clerk with ink-thin panic in his voice. He had held the broken Vesta seal and the shorthand glyph that meant already accounted for. If the lamplighter reached him and broke him, there would be no witness who could tell me how the codex had felt in the hand when it was first lifted. If they reached Aurelia Fausta, the novice Vestal who had seen the exchange near these very porticoes, they would dampen a young voice that should not have to carry any of this, and yet had been given a piece. I turned from the alcove and made for the Temple of Vesta's precinct. The city's early hours were a net tightening, not with noise, but with arrangement. The Lamplighter's men were already moving to the next arcades. I had my first clue balanced like a small weight in my pocket. I needed the second. The temple waited, and the flame at its heart saw much. Chapter 5. The Vestal's Whisper. The Temple of Vesta is Rome's hearth. It is round because a hearth is. Inside, the sacred fire burns in a shallow basin. The fire is not metaphor. It is flame tended by women whose hands are steady because the city trusts them to keep one thing always alight. When you step near its precinct, you lower your voice without meaning to. I did not enter. Men do not wander there as they please, and I wanted truth, not outrage. I waited at the periphery by the shadow of an olive tree whose roots pressed up against the low wall, as if the city's oldest breath were calmly trying to lift its own house. A figure in a white veil approached with measured steps and stopped with a respectful pause between us. Aurelia Fausta, I said, keeping my tone as soft as the air and keeping my eyes level so she did not have to look up. She nodded once. Young, yes, but her gaze was focused, not frightened. The veil framed a face used to watching hands separate wool from flame. Her fingers were folded loosely together as if to remind them not to fidget. "You carry the memory of a night no one should have had to remember," I said. "I will carry the danger. You may carry only the details." That let her breathe. She glanced toward the temple. "I should be mending votive linens," she whispered. "But the senior priestess, she knows I noticed more than I should, and she told me to speak to a man with a quiet voice who would stand under an olive tree and not demand my name in the street. She did not give your name, but she reminded me of the virtue of prudence." "She is wise," I said. "Tell me what you saw after the Ides of March." I anchored the date. The day Caesar died was a day that aligned every other thing around it like filings around a magnet. Then, the filings moved again afterward, not randomly, but pulled by hands. The night after, Aurelia said, a man came with the chief Vestal's written authority. He said he would inspect certain chests to prepare garments for the funeral rites. He carried a brass lamp. It had 3 feet that made black kisses on the stone. He wore a ring with a dolphin. I thought it only decoration at first. His voice was steady, as if he had used other people's keys many times. "The written authority? Genuine?" I asked. "I think so," she said, and her voice trembled at that thought. Not because she doubted her elders, but because she hated the thought that authorization could be bent like a reed. I am not trusted with the seal. But the hand was right. The wording was correct. We obeyed. He inspected the chests. He took nothing I could see. Later, I thought perhaps he took what was light. "A palm-sized book bound with red thread," I said gently. "A codex, not a scroll." She blinked. "Yes," she breathed. I saw the red at the edge of a garment and told myself it was embroidery, but it was too straight. I looked away because it's my place to accuse a man holding a proper writ. And he held the lamp so the light threw my eyes where he wanted them to go. I nodded. "And afterward?" "Later that night," she said, "when the precinct quieted and the altar stones cooled, I left linens to soak. I took water to the porticoes by the theatre of Pompeii because the smoke had drifted there and I wished to bathe the scent of it from the cloth for mourning. In the portico of Pompeii, I saw the lamp-bearer again. He stood near a man in a short military cloak. No insignia. The cloak fell just above the knee. He kept his face to the shadows, and his feet turned slightly outward, as if ready to move fast. The lamp-bearer gave him a folded parchment. Not a book, just a folded sheet. The other man counted something by tapping the parchment twice with a gloved forefinger, and then tucked it into the inner seam of his cloak. "Payment," I said, "or a receipt." Men like to count, even when they pretend they are not counting. She studied my face. "Do you accuse the Vestals of complicity?" "Never," I said. "I name a man who used proper forms to hide improper intent. He brought a lamp and a dolphin. He left with a folded promise of something larger. Men like that do not destroy documents. They move them to where they can be edited." She drew in a breath and, after a small hesitation, reached into the fold of her sleeve. "I found this near a chest hinge yesterday," she said. She placed a small bronze piece on my palm. It was shaped like the head of a dolphin. The underside had a hollow socket, as if it had once capped something. Its edge was stained with beeswax and ash, and on its underside, so tiny you could miss them unless you were looking for them, 3 dots in a triangle. I let the weight of it settle into my hand. The bronze had cooled, but the story on it was warm. A keycap, I said. The head of a ring key. A dolphin matches the man's signet. He likely wore a ring, whose head shaped the key that at times snapped over a narrow stem to unlock a chest without drawing much notice. He set down his lamp, handled a wax seal from the Vestal stores, pressed, and a smear of sacred ash caught here. The 3 dots are art decoration. It is a guild mark. The Lamplighters leave their craft on their tools, the way a potter presses his finger into clay. She watched me breathe the faint scent rising from it. Myrrh and soot, she said, quietly proud to have named it. Yes, I said. Myrrh clings to lamp wicks. Soot clings to hands. Beeswax from Vesta's seal clings to anything it kisses. You have given me the second clue. Her eyes softened. Who is he? Quintus Marius Nerva, I said. They call him the Lamplighter. He tends the archives that live in the dark and moves them when daylight would not be kind to his patrons. He is not a killer by trade. He hires people for that. He prefers to edit history rather than bodies. When he must, he edits both. Aurelia's hands tightened and then relaxed. If he returns, you will walk in company, I said. Not with soldiers, because soldiers draw soldiers, but with market women who have always known how to walk in pairs where men forget to look. You will say nothing to anyone with a lamp who is not named by your senior priestess. I will gather the rest. She nodded. She was brave. Fear comes in 2 colors, the kind that makes you freeze and the kind that makes you careful. She wore the second. Did you see his lamp feet mark the stone? I asked. Everywhere he rested, she said. Triangles, they are easy to wash. But I see them still, even when I close my eyes. I showed her the red thread in my palm. This matches the binding of the codex you saw only as a straight line. And this, I added, showing the small folded scrap with its tiny grain, has the taste of fish oil soot mixed with cinnabar. He handled the red marks of Caesar's notes and then set down his lamp. The codex is light, but what it can move is heavy. Can you carry it? She asked. I will carry the weight, I said. You carry only this small truth. You have done your part and done it well. A shadow moved along the outer wall. Not fast, just present. We both heard it the way you feel a draft in a closed room. I slipped the dolphin keycap and the red thread into my inner pocket. I gave Aurelia the smallest of nods that said, "We will move, and we will do so without hurrying." We stepped away from the temple and toward the theatre's side gallery, where painted masks watched from their niches. This was a place of illusion. I prefer places like that, when someone wishes to make me disappear. I am fond of returning. Chapter 11. The Lamp at the Stairs. The painted masks stared with red mouths and wide eyes, frozen in expressions that had once helped audiences from the cheap seats see a face. Under them, the corridor was dim and cool. The stone steps that led toward Pompey's gardens greened with thin moss. I could smell boxwood and wet earth rising like a calm breath. Aurelia walked a half-step behind me, her sandals whispering against the grit. Footsteps entered the gallery behind us, unhurried. No clatter, the measured pace of men who believe time belongs to them. I felt the weight of their gazes on my back and didn't give them mine. Panic is a poor tool. I let my hand move to a curtain at the left, a heavy theatre drape. It shifted on its cord and offered a pocket of shadow. I lifted it just wide enough. "There," I said softly to Aurelia. She slipped behind, and I let the curtain fall with the grace of someone checking a seam, not someone hiding a life. The footsteps stopped. A lantern glow warmed the cold stone. A quiet man set a brass lamp on a narrow sill, and the 3 little feet kissed the stone. He stepped aside. Another figure stood where the light wanted him. His cloak was dark and travel-worn. He carried no obvious weapon, but his posture was a held note. His beard was trimmed, and his eyes, under a steady brow, assessed the space the way one reads a room for weaknesses. He let silence do the first piece of work. "Quintus Marius Nerva," I said. My voice didn't echo. It did not need to. We share a fondness for clean edges and good light. The lamplighter regarded me with measured politeness. "And punctuality," he said. "You are where I would have looked for you only an hour from now. You have saved me the hour." His gaze slid to the curtain and then back to me. He didn't move toward it. He didn't need to. "The Vestal novice," he said, as if the words were a weather report. "You keep delicate things near you, sensible until the weather changes." "Not all weather must end in thunder," I said. "Sometimes it ends in a steady rain that cleans steps others have dirtied." He smiled without teeth. "We could share philosophy until Antony is ready to raise a city with his voice. But I very much enjoy finishing work before crowds grow passionate. Passion tramples paper." He gestured lightly at my inner pocket. "You have something, and I have something. Perhaps an exchange. Custody for her own protection." He nodded toward the curtain, and a quiet arrangement. "You surrender any found leaves or fragments, and I leave your companions uninterfered with. I have no love for needless wounds." "That is a curious phrasing for a man working a city that watched Caesar bleed," I said. "You speak like a clerk putting a red line through a sentence and pretending the story remains the same." "We prefer tidy narratives," he said. "Rome is unkind to untidiness." He lifted his lamp and held it between us. The 3 little feet were blackened evenly. Engraved along the underside was a discreet triangle, craftsman's pride hidden where only oil and ash would see. He set it back on the sill, and the 3 soot kisses marked the stone again, soft as moths. I nodded at the lamp. "Your signature is on your souls." He inclined his head, an admission without apology. "You know what you are hunting. A codex in Caesar's hand," I said plainly, rubricated here and there. A shorthand glyph for "already accounted for," names beside it: Brutus, Cassius, Decimus, each marked to ground that some pledge had been settled in advance. And one more line: "A meeting set for the 16th of March. Deliver the final pledge," written in Caesar's quick hand. A meeting with an intermediary who prefers a cloak without insignia. A man who never lets the light see his rank. The lamplighter's eyes narrowed the smallest amount. "It is a rare pleasure to show a man something he thought you could not see." He held his smile as if it were a coin he might keep. "You play at prophecy," he said. "No," I said. "I read soot." When a lamp rests on a sill where rubricated pages lay, it takes a little of their red. When a dolphin keycap pops free from a ring by a hinge, it bites beeswax that has only ever touched sacred seals. When a young woman of good sense sees a folded parchment change hands by the portico of Pompeii, she names the distance between delivery and payment. You are not here to burn the codex. You are here to season it. "Season?" he said, amused. "A cook would call it that," I said. "A forger calls it augmentation. You add a sentence in the master's hand, something that doesn't change the outline but sharpens a line you prefer. A detail that will be quoted outside the forum before the forum has time to think. By tonight, Antony's speech will begin to fix Rome's memory of Caesar. Your patron will want that memory to include a small notch in the wood that makes other boards fit neatly in the future. That notch can be a lie pressed into the truth while the truth is still soft." He lifted the lamp, contemplative. He was not embarrassed to be understood. Professionals enjoy recognition, even across lines. "The city wants a story," he said. "We make it easy for the city to carry it, and hard for dissent to stand," I said. "You will not get the codex before the speech if I do my work well. If you get only a whiff of it, you will plant rumor in its place. Rumor is a fast weed." He tilted his head. "Have you considered that the codex might not be flattering to your hopes?" "I do not tend hopes," I said. "I tend facts that have not yet been put in cages. The codex, if allowed out of your hands and out of Antony's, will breathe on its own. If not, it will become a tool with only one handle. Your men followed Lucius Attilius Neso. You let him taste dread and then looked bored when he tried to describe the book. You train witnesses to yearn for silence." He gave half a shrug, conceding the technique. "Will you trade?" "No," I said simply. "I will, however, propose a different bargain. Later." "Yet." He stepped closer. The lamp's smell sharpened, oil, myrrh, the faint fish edge of a seasoned wick. "You think you can bring your bargain to me. You think you can choose the hour." "I choose the tempo," I said. "Antony chooses the hour. He will use Caesar's will like flint and lay the bloodied toga where everyone can see how much cloth can drink before it surrenders. Your insertion into that chorus is a risk. You prefer quieter theatres." He watched me a moment longer, then glanced at the curtain again. Without looking at it, I shifted my stance, not blocking him, just stating a fact about space. He let out a breath through his nose and made a small, neat gesture. His scout took the lamp from the sill. The 3 soot kisses remained, their triangle marking the pause in our conversation. "Very well," the lamplighter said. "I shall enjoy your method. The next time we speak, the city will be louder. Bring me something I can admire." He turned and drifted down the corridor with his man, their feet quiet as they climbed away toward the garden light. Only when their steps faded did I shift the curtain enough for Aurelia to slip out. She was pale but steady. "He knew I was there," she whispered. "He guessed," I said. "He needed me to know that he could guess. Let us leave this hall. Masks watch but cannot help." We climbed the steps to Pompey's gardens. Boxwood hedges breathed their sharp green scent. A small pool, mirrored a patch of slow sky. The city below exhaled and inhaled. Time did not stop. Antony's moment was moving toward us like a tide. The deadline had moved closer. A small, simple fact stated by the way men like the Lamplighter accelerated their day when a speech approached. I sat on a marble bench worn smooth by years and set the dolphin keycap, the red thread, and my soot grain on the stone beside me. Pieces of a small storm. You diffuse storms by taking them apart. Chapter 7. Triangles and red thread. The grove was quiet. Leaves gave a soft shimmer when a breeze found them. The pool made a rounded accent to the garden's sentence. I set my hat beside me and rested my palms on the cool marble bench. Slow work now. If you move too fast, your head slides past your own logic. I placed the red thread where the sun could make it a line of color. I set the broken bronze dolphin keycap next to it, its tiny triangular engraving catching a pinpoint of light. I touched the folded scrap with the cinnabar soot grain and left it closed. Sometimes you keep a smell for later, so your nose does not grow tired of it too soon. Let us speak plainly, I said, more to the pieces than to Aurelia. She sat on the low wall across from me, her hands tucked under her veil, watching with the patient attention of someone used to learning by watching. Clue 1. Red-dyed linen thread. It matches Lucius Attilius Naso's description of the codex binding. It was caught in a splinter near a storeroom behind the Curia of Pompeii. That place has no reason to host a garment chest, unless someone wished to move things to and from the funeral preparations. The thread carries a faint smell of cinnabar and fish oil soot. Conclusion. The person who handled the codex had just handled a travel lamp, or vice versa. Because the cinnabar is its general dust, it is specific. It rubs off when rubricated pages are touched, and then touched again by a hand that rests a lamp while working. I shifted my gaze to the bronze dolphin. Clue 2. A keycap shaped like a dolphin, snapped from a ring key. It bears beeswax, stained with ash from the sacred fire at the Temple of Vesta. The underside is engraved with 3 tiny dots in a triangle. That is the Lamplighter's guild mark, a hidden maker's signature. The smell of myrrh clings to it, which is the scent of a wick that has burned in a brass lamp carried by someone who prides himself on craft. Conclusion. The man who opened the chest inside the temple used a ring key with a dolphin head and set down a brass lamp at every pause. He left marks that his own men barely notice because they were trained not to see their own footprints. I opened the folded scrap, a sliver, and inhaled. Then closed it again. Clue 3. The smear of cinnabar mixed with fish oil soot under the shelf. That combination is it a kitchen spill. It is a travel stain. It links a primed lamp to the handling of a red-marked page. It tells us where the codex rested before it was moved again. I let the weight of my thoughts settle. Witness 1. Lucius Attilius Naso, inventory clerk at the Temple of Vesta. He saw a thin, palm-sized codex bound in red thread. He recognized Caesar's shorthand on its leaves and saw strange marks beside names: Brutus, Cassius, Decimus, each labeled with Caesar's rare notation for already accounted for. He was approached by a quiet man with a brass lamp and a dolphin signet, who offered him safety in exchange for silence. He refused. Footsteps followed him. The codex later vanished from the chest. I raised my eyes to Aurelia. Witness 2. Aurelia Fausta. She saw the lamp-bearer enter the temple with the chief Vestal's written authority to inspect chests for funerary needs. Later, she saw him in the portico of Pompeii exchange a folded parchment with a man in a short, military-style cloak with no insignia. The man kept his face in shadow and turned his feet outward like a runner. I leaned back and let my voice slow even more, the way one speaks when reminding a friend of simple truths at the end of a long day. Mini recap, I said. A codex written by Julius Caesar existed. It named names already accounted for, meaning Caesar had, in his own way, settled parts of the conspiracy in his mind or on the record, perhaps by promises, perhaps by planned actions. It also scheduled a meeting on March 16, after the Ides, with an intermediary described as delivering final pledges from conspirators who believed themselves unseen. The codex was lifted from Vesta's custody under the pretext of official preparation for the funeral. It passed into the Lamplighter's sphere, where documents are not destroyed but rearranged. A shadow courier with military bearing received something, likely a receipt, instructions, or a small proof, and disappeared. The Lamplighter seeks not to erase the codex, but to augment it, so that when Antony's oration sets the city's grief, a guided rumor could harden into history. Aurelia exhaled slowly. Why would Caesar write already accounted for next to those names? In Caesar's shorthand, I said, that phrase does what it's ignored. It means settled as a line item. He used it to mark tasks handled in advance, debts prepaid, or political arrangements that no longer needed fresh discussion. Next to Brutus, Cassius, and Decimus, it could bode any of three things. First, that he had planned for their opposition and secured countermeasures, perhaps appointments that neutralized their reach. Second, that he had received pledges from them that satisfied a concern that seems unlikely given the outcome. Third, and most dangerous to any single narrative, that he had marked them as parts of a design he intended to reveal or overturn after the Ides. If the codex contained notes that suggested Caesar was about to pivot, a forger could adjust that pivot to bless or damn a chosen faction. The man in the cloak, she said. Who does he serve? Not his own insignia, I said. A cloak without marks means plausible deniability. He could be a former officer or a messenger tied to a household that values distance. Decimus Junius Brutus Albinus, for instance, wore his soldier's neatness in the Senate. But I will not put a name on him in my notes unless I must. What matters is the function. He was a bridge. The Lamplighter paid him to move a message or a token, or to receive proof that a thing existed long enough to be useful. She watched the pool. And now I plan, I said. But first, one more thought. I closed my eyes a moment to let the shape of the city appear on the inside of my lids. Antony will speak soon. He will display Caesar's bloodied toga. He will read Caesar's will. The crowd will feel the weight of generosity and violence at once. That is Tinder. If the Lamplighter reveals a found codex at that moment, even a scrap, even a whisper, it would bind the crowd's grief to a sentence heavy with convenience. I need to prevent that without making the codex a weapon in the other direction. Aurelia's mouth tightened into a small, brave line. How? By feeding him something that is dangerous to him and safe for us, I said. A decoy, a choir that looks and smells right, that carries enough of the Vesta seal's breath to satisfy his nose and enough of the lamplighter's favorite comforts to lull his suspicions. A decoy that bears a mark only I will know, so that when it resurfaces later, I can silence it without a word. Meanwhile, the true leaves, ones we can recover, will be placed where they will survive the night and be discovered in a way that spreads truth slowly, like a rumor that no one can hold completely. She nodded once. Where can truth be safe? In stone that the city ignores because it thinks it already knows it, I said. An old inscription at Vesta's temple. A cracked dedication that has borne rain and myrrh and the eyes of thousands without anyone bothering to pry. We will tuck the leaves into its hollows. We will leave a shadow of a sign for someone months from now. A clerk's marginalia will sprout like small plants between stones after a rain. Not enough for anyone to swing as a sword today. Enough to keep one faction from owning the entire story. She watched my hands as I made the plan on the bench with the pieces like a quiet game. The dolphin keycap went north. The red thread went east. The folded scrap remained center. I will need your trust, I said, and Lucius's feet. He will walk as if he is going to the market and meet me at a stall, with olives as a cover for words. I will ask him to bring the finder of any decoy, not to the courier, not to the magistrate, but to me. Lucius is frightened, she said. Good, I said. Fear that keeps a man alert is a tool. Fear that freezes him is a trap. I will give him a task that replaces the second with the first. I stood, gathered the pieces with care, and felt the city tilt toward afternoon. The garden's shade had shifted a finger's width closer. Antony's hour approached like a drumbeat under the paving. The Lamplighter's scouts had widened their circle. It was time to start building my decoy. Chapter 8. Thread and Smoke. I do not enjoy forgery. I respect it enough to do it well when truth requires a curtain. The trick is it to lie like a peacock. A noisy lie is easy to spot. The trick is to lie like a moth quiet, soft and drawn to the same lamp the truth would choose. I found what I needed 2 streets from the forum, in a copyist's stall, a low doorway with reeds and wax tablets stacked like a small forest. The copyist owed me a favor from a different dream. He was not in, all the better. I left payment coin under a smooth stone and took a wax tablet whose frame had been rubbed thin by thumbs. The tablet's surface still held the last sting of a stylus. I warmed it near a brazier until the wax softened and took a new impression cleanly. On a work table, I set the broken fragment of the Vesta seal that Lucius had delivered to me in the waking world. It was beeswax flecked with ash. The torch of Vesta showed in miniature where the seal had snapped. I pressed that fragment into a shallow dab of fresh beeswax and lifted it. The impression was imperfect. Good. Perfection is a suspicion. I wanted the impression to look like someone had sealed something in a hurry with a borrowed seal. A thing done at the edge of authority, not under its clean center. Next, thread. I had the red linen that had caught in the splinter. It was too short to sew anything, and I would not waste a real relic on a fake. I matched it at a stall. A skein dyed in a similar bath. I cut a piece and rubbed it between my palms with a touch of oil and ash so it would lose its factory shine. I tugged it over a rough board to raise little hairs. Threads must look like they have already done a little work. I stitched a small quire, several leaves folded together, into a strip of cloth cut to the shape of a garment's inner seam. I wrote on the inner leaf, "My hand is tidy. I do not write like Caesar. I have studied his shorthand, and I could copy its skeleton, but I refused to pretend to his exact bones." The decoy didn't need to survive expert scrutiny for days. It needed to ring true for a man who wanted a reason to take it. I wrote a phrase that the Lamplighter expected. Deliver the final pledge, and just below it, a deliberate error in the shorthand's placement that a man hungry for confirmation would not notice at a glance, but would take like a sweet fruit. My pen left a dot slightly too far to the right in the glyph the accented. An accent that would distinguish this line from the genuine leaf I had already copied privately for my own record. Scent is as important as sight. I drew my small pouch of poppy oil from my pocket. Poppy smells gentle and sleepy, but to a lamplighter it signals a wick well loved. I touched the red thread in 3 places along its length and then, with a soot-blackened finger, pressed the oil into tiny dots. 3, in a triangle so small that only someone who had seen a lamplighter's signature would think to look and find it again. That would be my private marker. If the decoy surfaced later, I could point to the poppy triangle and say, "This was the moth I sent, not the butterfly you hope for." Aurelia watched from the stall's low bench. "It looks like something that has been alive," she said. "That is the point," I said. "Dead papers are safe. Living papers move. He wants a thing that moves." I wrapped the quire and sealed it with the imperfect Vesta impression, letting the beeswax cool while I held the red thread flat with my thumb so it would set with a slight wave, like something that had traveled in a garment seam and had been pulled out only recently. When I set it down, it made the soft knock of a small truth dressing itself for a performance. Now a stage. "Will the temple prepare a garment chest for the funeral display today?" I asked. "Yes," Aurelia said. "Fine linens. A draped garment for the bier. It will pass through the portico behind the curia shortly after midday. Then we will dress our moth in that wardrobe," I said. "You will place this decoy in the margin of a linen seam where a careful man with a lamp will find it if he is looking for something he already believes exists. He will think himself very clever. He will take it with quiet joy and carry it to his master as if he had plucked a fig from a high branch." Aurelia's eyes glinted with restrained humor. "He will not notice the triangle of poppy scent?" "He will notice poppy," I said. "He will assume it is accidental. He will not think to smell for the pattern. The pattern is only for me." We left the stall by a side alley. I tucked the decoy into the fold of Aurelia's sleeve. She moved with the disciplined grace of a novice trained not to let her hands proclaim her thoughts. We kept to the shade and did not hurry. In Rome, running is a confession. Walking is power. In the marketplace, the olive seller I had named in my head as my rendezvous leaned on his counter and watched the forum as if it were an interesting play. Lucius Attilius Naso slid into the shade a few steps away, eyes darting, posture half turned as always. He kept his leather satchel close under his arm. "Lucius," I said, "you have done well to keep your head down. Today I will ask you to lift it only long enough to carry a message." He swallowed. "To whom?" To the man who will find a small bound thing where he is certain he should find it, I said. He will be pleased. He will ask you where to bring it. You will tell him to bring it to me at the shaded arcade by the west end of the Theatre of Pompeii, not to the Curia, not to any magistrate. To me. Use my name softly, as if you were embarrassed to say it. People trust embarrassed men. He blinked, surprised by the oddity of the instruction, and then nodded. Yes. If anyone follows you, I said, you will stop to buy olives. Twice, at 2 different stalls. You will complain loudly about the price to the first seller and compliment the quality to the second. That change in tone will make a bored man suspect you are tedious. He will stop listening to you. You will then arrive at the arcade. He almost smiled. The smallness of the tasks steadied him. Yes, he said again. Aurelia moved off to the temple with her sleeve neat. Lucius faded into the market flow, the way a careful phrase dissolves into the rest of a paragraph. I stood a moment and watched the horizon of the forum. A low murmur was growing there, the kind of murmur a crowd makes when it gathers for a purpose it has not yet named aloud. Mark Antony would soon step forward. He would lift his voice and set a tone. The Lamplighter would wish to place a gloss upon it. I meant to give him a gloss he could read only one way. Before returning to the arcade, I stepped into the Temple of Vesta's periphery again with a carpenter's tool, a slender chisel I had borrowed and paid for with another coin. The cracked inscription on the temple's outer wall, dedication from decades ago, had a hollow behind one letter where water had worried at the mortar. I eased the stone edge with patience, the way a librarian eases a book from a shelf too tightly packed. The gap widened just enough to receive folded leaves. From my inner pocket, I took the genuine pieces I had reclaimed in the quiet between meetings, the ones Aurelia's senior had let me review when she understood what lived on them. Not the whole codex. I am not a thief dressed as a savior. Just the leaves that held the shorthand line already accounted for, and the date, the 16th day. I slid them into the hollow and set a whisper of mortar over the lip, smoothed with the flat of my chisel and my thumb. It did not look new. It looked like Rome. I wrote a small private copy of the crucial shorthand phrase in my notebook, in my own hand, not in Caesar's. My purpose was not to make myself a second source. It was to prevent my mind from misremembering a curved line as a straight one when I told the next part of the story. Then, in the shadow of an old votive stone that had seen 1,000 sandals pass, I closed my eyes and felt for the lamplighter in the city the way you feel for a current underwater. He would go where triangled soot marks had led him each morning. He would touch stones and imagine himself unseen. He would follow the garment chest into the backstage corridor because men who rely on authority love to walk where authority has already made a track. I moved to the shaded arcade by the west end of the Theatre of Pompeii. Its columns offered coolness. I stood where a man could blend with a column and still see the bend in the portico. Time passed in a steady pour. The city's murmur thickened, a low thunder growing behind marble, held in check by expectation. The bier with Caesar's body would soon move. Antony would soon roll his lines across the forum like a tide. Footsteps approached, lunked, hurried, measured. A young scribe with nervous shoulders took a breath and walked past, then circled back as if he had forgotten something, then walked past again. Behind him, 2 plain-cloaked men moved with less pretense at being anything but watchers. Lucius's outline appeared at the bend, and he did his olive routine with an admirable, exaggerated weariness. He was becoming a better actor than he knew. I remained still and let the plan finish drawing its own lines. The decoy would be where it needed to be by now. The Lamplighter's scouts would have lifted it with careful hands and a private thrill. The Lamplighter himself would be near. He liked to receive treasures within sight of the performance he meant to accompany. I counted my breath. 1, to steady my pulse. 2, to feel the columns cool under my fingertips. 3, to remind myself that the city's oldest fire still burned in a round temple where a young woman tended it with small movements and clear eyes. 4, to commit to ending this act without anyone's blood on the stone. Then I opened my eyes and watched the corner where the Lamplighter would come into view. The plan was in place. The next move would be made in the shadow of Antony's voice, and it would decide whether the codex shaped the day or whether the day swallowed the codex whole. The morning of the funeral broke like a held breath over Rome, and I let it out slowly while I walked the edges of the crowd. My job was simple to say and delicate to do. Keep a book from becoming a blade. The air smelled of wet wool, myrrh, and the city's anxious heat. I kept to the cooler margins and watched the tides of people fold toward the forum like the Tiber pushing into a narrow bend. Chapter 9. Poppies in the portico. I moved beneath a shaded arcade where the stone kept last night's cool. A column pressed its chill against my shoulder. Out beyond the colonnade, the bier waited, draped and solemn, while 1,000 hands pointed and 1,000 mouths tried to speak at once. Somewhere behind that human surf, Mark Antony readied his voice and his timing. He would bring out the bloodied toga when the moment was right. He knew theatre. Rome would watch itself in his eyes. Closer to me, on the shadowed side, the Lamplighter's man approached with the gait of someone acting ordinary. His cloak carried the damp of drizzle and the faint, oily shine of lamp soot rubbed into the fibers to darken it further. He carried a leather folder under his arm, fingers compressed in a way that said the contents mattered, and the hand wanted to shake. He stopped beside a bench. The Lamplighter was already there, seated at ease. Quintus Marius Nerva looked like a carved calm among nerves. He set his brass lamp on the bench between his hands. Its 3 feet left a familiar, triangular kiss of soot on the slab. He nodded to his man, received the folder, and let his thumb test the thread that bound it. The thread was red. The seal on the tie was a fragment of Vesta's torch impressed into beeswax. I recognized the impression because I had pressed it in my own hands back in the world of waking tools and quiet tables. The seal gave off a hushed breath of poppy and lamp smoke when it cracked in half. A scent I had placed there on purpose, mixed to a ratio that only I would know. 3 soft notes. Try dot. I stepped out of the column's shadow before he opened the first leaf. No rush, no flourish. The crowd's murmur surged and fell like slow surf beyond us. I let my hands rest at my sides. I kept my voice low. Good morning, Quintus Marius Nerva. His eyes didn't widen, but there was a brief, professional pause. The type of pause a locksmith makes when a new key speaks in the tumblers, a way he did not plan. Not many know that name, he said, voice gentle and without threat. Fewer say it aloud, where men hold their grief like tinder. You work in edged rooms, I said. You already know the weight of say a name at the wrong time. He inclined his head, a small motion, neither admitting nor denying anything. His left thumb pressed where the seal had broken, then lifted and hovered. He caught the scent, poppy folded into smoke. He looked at the thread more closely, and then at me, as if to say, we would talk about that later. Your man was quick, I said. My friend was quicker. He brought this to me instead of the courier. You have the choir you wanted, and you step out to stop me from enjoying my good fortune. He smiled, very slightly. Or perhaps to enjoy it with me. Sit, there's room. I stayed standing, a polite refusal. I'll stand. The stone helps me thick. I tapped the column lightly with my knuckles, and so does the sound of a city at the edge of a story. He waited. I let the crowd's noise fill a breath, then spoke. On the genuine leaf, I said softly, Caesar wrote a line, deliver the final pledge. He placed it just under a shorthand symbol that means already accounted for. It is a rare sign. Most readers think it means omit. It doesn't. It means promised and paid before anyone noticed. You know the difference. Your clients might not. His gaze tilted, the way a hawk's eye tilts when the ground yields a change it expected and did not. You have seen the genuine leaf, he said. I have seen enough of it to know where your hand will be tempted to walk, I answered. For example, you will want to place a red rubric, a small cinnabar flourish, directly above deliver. It is tidy, it is also wrong. Caesar placed no rubric there, he marked the symbol instead. If you were to put red where he did not, your copyist would betray your work to anyone who knows his hand. Beyond the arcade, Antony's voice rose, testing the edge of his opening. The sound moved through the pillars as a resonance. The crowd leaned toward it, a field of barley bending to wind you cannot see yet feel in your bones. I could almost hear the linen of the bloodied toga in its folded weight, waiting its cue. The lamplighter drew no dagger, he drew no shout. He simply slid the first leaf halfway out of its folder and peered at the fibers of thread I had tied with a neat, invisible triple knot. His nostrils flare almost imperceptibly, cataloguing the scent. He lifted the brass lamp a fraction off the stone, looked at the 3 round marks it had left, and set it back down with careful grace. What is your aim? He asked. Even men who deal in light prefer to know where they are to set it. To keep real light from becoming a flame, I answered. Let this choir be found and then lost. Let it move inside your patron's circle and then vanish before it reaches the rostra or any public place. Let no faction hold it as a sword. In return, Aurelia Fausta and Lucius Attilius Naso will not be troubled, followed, pressed, or harmed. You will withdraw your night watchers from Vesta's precinct and from the stalls where Lucius buys his ink, and you will do it now, not in a few days. A breeze moved through the arcade, carrying fine ash from the direction of the bier. Ash has a way of finding the hollows where it can settle and be forgotten, until a hand touches it and remembers the fire. The ash brushed the back of his fingers where they lay on the lamp's handle. Suppose I say no, he murmured. Suppose I take what is in my hand and make it sing the song I prefer. Then you will sing alone, I said, because the poppy scent you noticed lives inside the thread in a pattern that can be read if you know the trick. Anyone with a nose and patience could test a copy against this one and see your additions for what they are. And if you test it yourself and decide to proceed, the genuine leaves will still lie where you cannot reach them, long enough to turn up in harmless pieces, where some clerk's marginal note will outlast your patron's temper. You will watch your work compete with a whisper you cannot locate. I do not think you admire that kind of competition. His mouth made a line. He set the folder down and interlaced his fingers slowly, as if weaving a small net and considering what fish it was meant to hold. The crowd's sound rose another degree. Antony's voice had found its pitch. I heard the moment when words became a current and the people began to trust it to carry them. There would be the will and the parks for the people, and then the toga brought up high with a sweep of arm. What was the exact wording of the line as Caesar set it? He asked at last. Deliver the final pledge at the edge of the gardens, the day after the Ides. Not at noon or at dark, at the edge of the gardens. The phrasing matters. It means he didn't plan to march into the Curia with a parade of confessions. He planned a quiet exchange at a boundary. You know boundaries. They are where your trade lives. He let out a small breath and looked past me to the light, measuring not the sun, but the temper of a square full of people who had loved or hated a man, now carried on a bier. He could feel, as I could, that any fresh document waved in that air would act like a spark near a hayloft. You propose, he said, that I persuade my patron there is too much risk for public theatre, and then I make this little book. Travel, disappear. Your friend in the temple, the boy in the market. I call them off. I propose nothing dramatic, I said. Quiet is the aim. Your habit is quiet when the stakes are highest. This is such a time. He took the lamp and lifted it again, turned it a quarter turn, set it down so the 3 feet placed a second triangle beside the first. He studied both sets of smudges, then looked at the seam of thread on the folder and the delicate flecks of red on the knot. He pinched the thread and brought it to his nose. The poppy announced itself again, soft as a breath that wants to sleep. Beyond us, a roar rose, then turned into a sustained sound like a drum roll played by 1,000 hands on 1,000 chests. Crowd's reaction as Antony lifted the toga. Even in the shadows, I could feel that collective shock. A city seeing its own blood held up in cloth learns a new thing about itself in an instant, and cannot unlearn it quickly. You have a talent for arranging a choice so that it looks like my idea, he said. I have a talent for walking edges. While the city sways, I answered, we both prefer an outcome where the floor stays underfoot. He gestured to his man with 2 fingers. The man, whose eyes had been busy counting exits, stepped close. The lamplighter leaned, spoke a few words I did not catch, and the man nodded and peeled away at once into the crowd, already half vanished. I will move the watchers, the lamplighter said. The Vestal novice and the clerk will feel air again, and this choir will live in circles that do not touch the rostra. It will not touch the ears that want a public miracle today and tomorrow, I asked. He gave the smallest of shrugs. Tomorrow we will all count who we kept alive and who we did not betray. To a crowd's quick justice. He turned the folder once, as if weighing it a final time. You know, of course, that futures are art controlled by removing a single tile from the mosaic. Of course, I said. but we can choose which tiles we pry loose and which we glue down. For a moment, we simply listened. Antony's voice ebbed and flowed. Word pierced the hum now and again. Not the words the playwright would later put in his mouth, but the practical words Rome recognizes. Testament, gift, parks, soldier. Grief moved, sharpened, turned. The lamplighter rose. He slipped the folder back under his cloak, then lifted the lamp. The feet left their marks as he raised it, a triple sign doubled on stone. He looked down at the soot triangles as a captain glances back at the wake before he leaves the shore. "You designed a thread I could smell," he said, half amused. "I designed a life where a lamp's foot can tell a story without a single word. It seems we are colleagues of a sort." "On some nights," I said, "even opposites need a common verb." He nodded, then stepped away, melting into the curve of the arcade, devoured by shade and then by the raw light beyond. He did not look back. He did not send another man to do it for him. I listened to the tail of his steps until the people's sound swallowed them whole. I stood a while longer and watched the city feel its way over a new cliff. In the space behind the eyes, the little codex lay safe enough for now, divided between a hollow of stone and a future clerk's tidy hand. The 2 young lives tied to it could breathe without counting footsteps. That would do. Chapter 10. Ash settles and a door opens. After the oration, the forum did what crowds do when allowed to feel more than one kind of heat. It boiled and cooled by turns. Some faces were bright with tears, others with argument, others with that open, dangerous look that says a thought has snapped into place and demands to be acted upon. Men took the words home to tell them again and again to walls and wives. Some stayed to make a bonfire of whatever wood stood too near. The air swelled with smoke. I kept to the edges. The portico of Pompeii held a pocket of shade, still touched with the morning's calm, and I took it into my lungs and let it out slower than before. The theatre's curve remembered sweeter, quieter shows than this, and the steps down to the garden pool offered the closest thing to order I could find. Under that calm, I threaded my way back to the Temple of Vesta's precinct. I did not try to enter. Some thresholds demand a certain kind of foot. I stood a respectful distance away and caught Aurelia's eye when she passed between duties, her veil tucked just so, her hands carrying not a codex or a scandal, but clean linen for the day's small rituals. She paused, with the kind of pause that isn't a pause at all, but a space made by bravery. "You are well?" I asked. I was met and told to continue my tasks, she whispered. No more questions. No more men with lists asking about trunks. The chief Vestal looked at me this morning and said, "What you saw, if you saw anything, you saw under Vesta's eye, and she saw you. Walk straight." I understood. "That is a blessing wrapped as an order," I said. She gave me a tiny smile, the sort of smile that makes the hours in a day sit more upright. "And Lucius?" she asked, very quietly. "He will find that footsteps behind him have decided to walk beside someone else," I said. "He would be wise to vary his routes for a time. He will not be pressed." She nodded and went on, measured and unhurried. A temple honors its goddess by not rushing. From there I drifted to the cracked votive inscription where the stone hides a depth most eyes do not notice. The niche looked like nothing much. It looked like a line of letters softened by time. It looked like history doing what it usually does, blurring. I set one careful finger in the seam and felt the faint, waxy cool within. The genuine leaves rested in their narrow cradle. They did not want to be disturbed. They didn't want to do harm, and so I left them to the slow work of obscurity. Another hand, months from now, would find a scrap, copy a line, and add a polite note in the margin of some other text. That would be enough. A whisper can outlast a shout if you let it sit in quiet rooms while people forget to check under it. As I walked back through the porticoes, vendors were returning their stalls to working shape, brushing ash from boards with familiar, business-like swipes. An old man fixed the hinge of a fruit crate with a bronze nail and a soft hum, kind of everyday act that reminds a city how to behave when it wants to come apart. A child chased a swallow's shadow along the stones and then lost it when the bird's swift turn baffled the child's feet. The world goaded itself into normal again as best it could. I sat on a step and let my knees rest. The marble gave me its stored night cold in slow measure, and I traded it for the warmth in my hands. Across the square, a cluster of men argued in that intimate way Romans have, where the hands perform a whole opera while the voice stays low. The scent of olive smoke made a trail toward me. The trail wound gently around my head and brim and then slipped away. I breathed it in, and the world turned inside out with a quietness I had practiced for years. The cool of the stone became the wood of a familiar chair. The ash in the air became the sweet, domestic steam of tea. The cries of a crowd softened into the soft snore of my old beagle, Penelope, asleep with her chin on my boot, the way she likes to guard me by accident. I opened my eyes in my own room. Rain ticked at the window with a patience that no crowd could manage. The kettle murmured its small song. The desk waited. My coat smelled of Rome and rain, and it pleased me that my modest life could hold both things without complaint. On the desk lay the broken Vesta seal. It had acquired 3 new freckles of soot in a neat triangle, as if the feet of a tiny imagined lamp had stepped there and then walked away without a sound. Beside it lay the dolphin keycap, clean now, metal showing its tired, soft gleam. My notebook lay open to a fresh page. On it, in my own neat hand, I'd copied the shorthand glyph, a small, efficient curl with a tail, the one Caesar used for already accounted for. I rested the pen beside it and watched the ink dry. A knock at the door would have been simply another sound in the house's long memory. But there was no knock. There was only the rain and the hum of the kettle and the dog's gentle breath. I let the quiet tell me the case had ended, as well as such things can. There are cases you finish and put away, and there are cases you finish and put somewhere that can't be found unless history needs them. This had been the second kind. The lamplighter would carry his lamp for other patrons. Aurelia would learn the long patience of her order and find a sort of peace in its rhythms. Lucius would add columns and lines and notes to his ledgers, and maybe, if he lives wisely and long, he would one day be called to remind someone that threads matter, and knots, and the smell of poppy when no one expects it. I folded the notebook closed and ran a thumb along the edge. Paper speaks when you touch it. It told me it would keep what I had asked it to keep. That was enough. The rain eased, then settled in again, steadier, like a vow. The wind down. The room was quiet in the way rooms learn from their owners. The lamplight rested on the desk without any urge to flicker. Steam climbed from the kettle, thin and white, like a silver thread pulled through cloth. Outside, the street shone with a varnish of rain, and every cobble earned its small underline of light. The house across the way released a slow creak as the day's dampness tucked itself into the wood, an old house stretching before sleep. I leaned back and let the chair take my weight. The wood had learned the map of my back over the years and carried it without complaint. Penelope shifted, sighed, and settled. Her ears flopped into two neat crescents that fit the line of her skull like a second, smaller set of curtains. The way her paws twitched said she was chasing something soft and easy. Not a hare or a fox, just a warm patch of sun she remembered from a summer long gone. Rain on the window made a rhythm you could count if you wanted to. Though to fast rhythm, a heart's rhythm when it is full and untroubled. In the alley, water found the little runnels it always finds. It travels like a reader's finger under a line of text, steady and sure. It knows where it's going without needing to hurry. I let my eyes rest on ordinary things. The brass lid on the sugar tin, dull from 100 thumbprints. The spoon that had a notch where it once fell against a stone step. The soft faded strip of ribbon that marked a page in a book I would return to later, when the mind wanted to be fed instead of soothed. The ribbon didn't mind waiting. It had no other job. You may choose a small thing in your own room to rest your eyes on. A corner of a picture frame, the edge of a shelf, the thread on a blanket. Let it be your anchor. Let it be a simple point you can return to even with your eyes closed. If your breathing wants a rhythm, let it be the rhythm of rain, not the hard slap of a storm, but the even tap of water finding its way home. In my mind, the arcades of Rome were still there, but at a distance now, like a city you see from a hillside at dusk, its lights beginning to stipple on one by one while you sit far enough away that the noise cannot reach you. I remembered the curve of the theatre and the way the swallows flew under its eaves, turning on a whisper. I remembered the polished stone in the portico, burnished by hands for a century, each hand an anonymous kindness to the next. I let the picture drift, and when it wanted to dissolve, I let it go. The house's noises rearranged themselves into a lullaby without words. A pipe settling, rain gathering and then loosening. The almost silent rub of branches along the window frame. In that kind of quiet, even a clock's tick would be too much. Time can be felt in simpler ways. The length of a breath, the easing of a shoulder, the softening of the jaw until the teeth aren't at work anymore, just neighbors side by side. If a thought arrives like a quick messenger, let it deliver its message, and then take off its sandals and sit by the door. It can wait there. You are not required to answer tonight. The important things know how to find you in the morning. Tonight, the body knows the way to bed without instruction. The mind can ride along and look out the window. I poured the tea and didn't drink it yet. I just held the cup and let the heat speak to my hands. It moved through the fingers and down into the wrists with a careful confidence. Warmth does not negotiate, it just goes where it is welcome. I watched the steam unwind and then be gone, the way breath will when sleep arrives, present, then invisible, then present again. The window held a mirror of the room's calm. A small gold oval of lamplight sat on the glass, and beyond it the dark was kind, not empty. If you looked closely, You could see the tiny trails the raindrops left as they came down the pane, joining one another, splitting, joining again. Like lines of history when they are allowed to be honest, arriving, leaving, returning, changing direction for reasons you won't know until later, if ever. It is all right not to know. It is all right to rest. Penelope exhaled a soft chuff as if to agree. Somewhere in the building, a neighbor set down a book. The faint hum of a wire sang against the weather, another kind of lullaby, the city's low note. The cup in my hands cooled to a friendly warmth, the sort you could sleep beside without thinking. I let my eyelids fall in their own time. Behind them, the shapes were gentle. If a stray image of marble or brass or a bronze dolphin drifted through, I let it pass like a small boat on a wide river. No need to board, just watch it go. A page turned in my mind and lay flat, ready to be written on some other night. Rest, I said, not aloud, and to no one in particular. It seemed like a good word to let stand in the middle of the room, the way a candle can hold itself still on a table without asking for applause. Rest for witnesses. Rest for clerks. Rest for a city that will have to be brave again tomorrow. Rest for you. I set the cup down. The rain agreed. The house listened. The night, content, settled its shoulders. And I, Snorelock Holmes, put the weight down for both of us. Good night.